Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Pastor Matt McKeown, and I am joined today by Aaron Shust. Aaron, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you,
And
Matt. Good to be here.
listen, you and I had a pretty awesome conversation a few months ago that I released, like in this interview type style, about music and what it means to be a worship leader and your background with music and that kind of thing. But today, I would love to share with my Christian brothers and sisters, your Christian brothers and sisters, a journey that you and I have both been on and continue to be on that is really exciting us. And I want to say at the outset, I don't want this to sound like kind of like Billy Mays, like I don't want to tell you how great the Sham Wow is or whatever.
Right.
I, I don't want this to be a sales pitch, but I really think that you and I can speak to something in our lives that has really brought a richness to our faith, and that is exploring the Jewish roots and the Jewish background of the Christian faith. So before we dive into that, because that's obviously a pretty big subject, just like I sort of asked you about your background in music last time, I wonder if you wouldn't mind me asking about your background in faith, your sort of testimony, as it were.
Sure. I grew up in a Christian family. Both my parents still together and still alive. One younger brother. He's 4 years younger than me. So we were at a church, a Christian Missionary Alliance denomination, a Protestant evangelical denomination. And I always say about that denomination, just in general, at least in my biased opinion, it always felt very, very, very level, very balanced, very middle of the road. Nothing crazy to the left or to the right. Preached Jesus. And him crucified, and the only way to the Father, and the Spirit is alive. And some people might think that's crazy, but we didn't. So my mom was in charge of the music, and whether she was doing the choir music for the adults, for the kids choir, or just coming up with the songs, like music, long story short, music and church music filled the house where I grew up. Throughout the week, because my mom was always preparing for something, either the coming week or the next Christmas or Easter. So it was always church. And I mean, to this day, Matt, the dreams that I have, like, and I'm not talking about like goals, I'm talking about like when I'm asleep having dreams at night, they often take place in that church building where I grew up. So much of my life was centered there, and it's all good memories. And yeah, the hallways stank a little bit because it's been around since the 1960s, and it kind of smells like, to this day, I can walk into another church and I can be like, this was built in 1961, wasn't it? I know this smell. Just great memories. But the church and music together was always a key part of everything we did.
Wow. I have a very similar upbringing. My mom was the music person at our church, and my dad was the pastor. So we were always there. If the doors were open, we were there. And I have to say, do you agree with me on this? Not only is there a church hallway smell, there's a church coffee taste.
Oh, now see, one of those is okay to my memory, and one of those is not.
The church coffee thing, it's always slightly too weak, and it's only powdered creamer. You know what I mean? There's a thing to it.
And it's been on the burner since 7 a.m.
Yes, exactly. It's a little bit like motor oil,
A little like motor
oil. So how did you, this pretty standard, growing up, and by the way, I'm a big fan of the Christian Missionary Alliance. My wife's best friend was an Alliance girl, and we did a lot of stuff with her church. I have a very dear friend that was a youth pastor when I was a youth pastor that was at a Christian Missionary Alliance church. And so we did a lot of stuff together, our two churches. So moving on from that, how does this nice Christian boy all of a sudden start caring about Jewish stuff? Like, how does that even happen? What was it for you that clicked or whatever?
Well, first of all, my mom was not only a music director, leader, it's everything I described, also teaching some piano on the side, but she, and maybe even more so, if you had to pick one identifying trait out of the two with my mom, she was a student of the Bible. And loved especially the Old Testament, what we would call the Old Testament, which I'm trying to get out of the habit because of what it indicates. And this is a whole other story. But mini caveat, Old often indicates obsolete. And we believe that's the furthest thing from the truth about the first half of our book. The Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the Torah, the entirety, what we would say ends with Malachi, or originally Second Chronicles. That is not obsolete. So
right.
That first half of the book, my mom especially loved. She's done studies on the Kings. When I was in junior high, she made a to scale model, and it was beautiful, of the tabernacle as a as what the high school kids did for a project. So I wasn't even able to be a part of it, except for I saw her planning it, and it was amazing. It was gorgeous. I mean, all the way to like they glued the bottom of this. It was the size of a table. It was huge, and they actually put sand, so it looked like it was on sand. It was gorgeous to scale. So my mom, this was always a part of what I saw around the house and what was talked about. Add to that, I think, when you bring in the music side of things, we somehow acquired, I think it was by Jews for Jesus, an LP, a record, those big brown black CDs, remember those things? So they're back, they're cool again, vinyls. I don't have this, I wish I did, but they would play this throughout the house. Not constantly, but probably for, when you're a kid, something happens for a month and it feels like a year. Something happens for a year, it feels like a lifetime. So I felt like it was a lifetime of listening to songs that had that. I got a piano sitting in front of me, kind of had that, the volume's down though, kind of had that, not with that instrument, kind of like that Eastern European, Yeshua HaMashiach has come to Israel. Moses and the prophets described him very, like that whole, so like these words and these melodies and the word Yeshua and the word Adonai, just kind of, and HaMashiach just floated through the air in my house. It wasn't strange to me. It wasn't alien to me. It was very connected to, this is the cultural sound of what we believe today. And even if we don't sing this song on Sunday morning, this song is valid. Now, those are not words that were said, but they were inferred. Am I saying that right? I always get implied and inferred right. They soaked in as truth. And I think that began the journey to where, when things kind of hit me like a ton of bricks in recent years, it wasn't alien, to use that word again.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I think in my particular journey, music had a big part of that as well. I went to an Assemblies of God high school. I went to a Christian school, and we had chapel service every Friday. And for some reason, we sang a lot of that type of music. I was drawn to it. That first of all, the minor chord is, one of the reasons I'm such a fan of the Beatles is their use of minors, and the same is true with this type of music. It was danceable. It was minor. It sounded, there was a yearning in it, a longing in it. And I was drawn.
To geek out on the Beatles there, they would take chords that were normally major in pop music and make them minor, like the 5 and the 4. And whoa, when you hear it, it's striking.
Yeah.
And there was, during that same season, there was a little bit of crossover, and this, in Christian music where the minor came back in, and it almost had this, I don't want to say a Middle Eastern sound, because it's a sound that came from the Russian, the Eastern European influence. But remember, I don't know what key it's in, but take me into the Holy of Holies.
Absolutely.
Right? Take me in by the blood of the Lamb. I mean, that was not a Jewish song. That was a Christian song. But take me into the Holy of Holies. Could it be any more Jewish? Right?
Absolutely.
But for whatever reason, there was a season of time where the church embraced this concept, and the music and even the words that were very Old Testament. Take the coal, cleanse my lips. Here I am. That's Hineni. That's Isaiah 6. Take me in by the blood of the Lamb. Okay, so are we talking about the Lamb of God who takes away the sin? Well, yeah, of course we are. But also, it's said through the Hebrew perspective of blood sacrifice and lamb and atonement and covering, but it was popularized. Like the general population liked it, accepted it, said, oh, that's cool, right. We'll sing that in a Christian church, no problem. And that was just one of many. right?
Well, when I was in high school, Hosanna Integrity put out a worship album that started with, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one God. Hallelujah. And it was very Jewish sounding, and it's the
The
Shema.
Shema.
I'm like,
I'm not familiar with that one. Wow.
oh, it's old, man. It's like 91, and it's so good. I do it. I lead worship twice a month at our local Messianic synagogue, and I do that one.
Nice.
And I do take me into the Holy of Holies. So anyway, but I think
The
both you
battle
and I were.
belongs to the Lord. That's another one. It just came to my head.
Yes,
Sorry to interrupt.
absolutely. No.
They just, in heavenly armor will answer. Now, I mean, like in 2020, we might hear that and think cheesy. But first of all, that's an opinion. That's subjective, right? And in context, and when done well and with excellence, and like I said, like no one felt that back then, at least none of my peers. Anyhow, we could go on about that, but it existed.
Right.
And I was very privy to it.
And what about, and I'm going to get this wrong, so please correct me. I can't remember if it's Paul Balash or Tommy Walker, whoever did, who is like him, the lion and the lamb, the praise Adonai, which again is I do that in the synagogue, because again, it even has Adonai,
Yeah, that's Paul.
Okay.
Tommy may have done it as well, but I'm pretty sure that's Paul.
I think you're right. Yes.
Yeah.
How very Jewish, So tell me about the first time that I had an experience to see you in person, and we talked about this on our last video, was at this Me'ochad conference, this conference for Messianic worship leaders a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And you and Joshua Aaron were there, and you began to share a little bit about sort of you diving in by contacting Joshua. Can you speak to that for a minute?
My first trip to Israel was beginning of 2016, January, February. Invited by Caleb for a tour that we were about to do here in the States, the Bible tour, in conjunction with the Department of Tourism in Israel. It was quick. It was like 4 or 5 days, but they threw out the red carpet and we hit all the big places and boom, boom, boom. And my wife came with me. It was a small group of just a couple of people on the Caleb deal. So we all fit into like basically a van, like a Sprinter type. So not a big bus. And the experience there was an emotional combination, given everything I just explained to you about my background and my upbringing, of being, it was a step or two deeper emotionally than this is where Jesus walked. It was definitely that. Like, whoa, he probably walked here. And I knew that was going to be the initial emotion. So I was going to give myself permission to feel it, Right. I knew there was something deeper, but I didn't know what it was. Okay. So I knew, but I was like, you know what? Fanboy out, be a tourist, enjoy it,
Right.
I fell in love with the history of it. I walked around with my Bible in my hand, kind of like, just like, okay, here, we're walking here too. Here we go. We did this. Like, and that was so cool. Being shocked how beautiful it was. Didn't expect that. I'm like, I started telling people, if you're saving up your nickels and your dimes to go to Paris or Italy and you have any stock in the Word of God, just skip it and go straight to Israel, because
that's gorgeous. Exactly what I tell people. I always tell people, if I have a chance to travel, I want to go back to Israel.
Yeah, sure, totally, 100%. I think what made that first visit as incredibly special as it was, despite all the specialness that happened, was meeting who's now a dear friend, David Kern, who's a filmographer. Made a movie, I Am Israel. Highly recommend that. 33 minutes of awesome. Talking about just the restoration of Israel, and that's kind of what he was focusing me on. He was kind of whispering in our ear, despite what the tour guide said, which was factual. But he was whispering in our ears, literally behind us in the bench behind us. Did you know that it says in the book of Jeremiah that this was going to come to fruition? And for 2,000 years, this hasn't happened. There hasn't been a thing growing, but all of a sudden there's vines and the wine is, flowing down the hills, just like Jeremiah said. And just like example after example of fulfillment, prophecy fulfillment. And even I heard a teaching a couple weeks ago, comparing. I'm gonna dive deep here, and maybe this is. I haven't even touched on meeting Joshua Aaron.
No problem. Go.
This
is great.
Allow me to deviate here for a second. We'll come back to him because he's a dear friend. He's become a dear friend. Where was I going with this, Matt? It
You were
was somewhere.
going, somebody whispering behind you, and
David Kern whispering all
yeah.
this truth about, this teaching that I heard was talking about how we as Christians are so quick, even if subconsciously, to criticize the Jews, as we read in the New Testament. When Jesus said this and the Jews responded, to vilify the entire Jewish population then, if not today, forgive us, for rejecting what God clearly laid out as prophetic, that the Messiah would come. And we can say, man, Isaiah 53, Psalm 21. I mean, everything. We Isaiah 9, like we pointed to this. Just 7. We said this was going to happen, and you missed it. And yet, this teaching from a Christian pastor, teacher, said that, and yet here in our day and age, so many prophecies have been fulfilled with the return of the Jewish people to their land, and Jerusalem no longer being trampled under feet by the Gentiles, which was Jesus' words of clarification. I won't say warning, but in Matthew chapter 24, like he said this would happen, prophecy, long story short, and yet we'll slough it off like, not important.
Right.
You know, and we're guilty. He's basically said we're guilty of the same thing. So I think to kind of get back to your question, those stirrings, like I knew this, I knew it was prophesied, and I knew it happened. Why am I sloughing it off? I think this might be important, Aaron, and it's time to wake up and pay attention to these things, because God said it would happen. It did. And he said something after that, like when you see these things happening, that generation will not pass until all these things come to pass. Like this is it. Like where God's Jesus is. So I'm going deep here, but that opened my eyes. I'll tell you this. This is around the time a couple of years ago when I stopped reading fiction novels, because I just stopped caring. And good ones, good fun fiction novels. You know, just passing the time, chilling out in the airport, airplane, just reading some fun little novels. I stopped caring. I'm like, there are things that are really important. And so reaching out to people like Joshua Aaron, because I found his music on an Apple Music search, because I started doing, as a family, we started doing our best to keep the Sabbath from Friday night to Saturday night. Like, let's have a little soundtrack to it. So after listening to a month worth of Fiddler on the Roof, and I had no other ideas, like let's diversify our soundtrack. I found Joshua Aaron, his music, Messianic worship leader. Everything he's saying is totally in line with what I believe. So it's kind of like the modern day version of what we talked about earlier. Like this music that I listened to in the 80s and the 90s, more for me in the 80s. Like, oh, it's still here, but it's new and it's fresh and it sounds like stuff that I would record, that I would read, that I would listen to. So I just reached out to him and I was like, man, I had no expectations except for to say, I just want to encourage you that you're doing a great thing. Keep it up. And lo and behold, he knew who I was. I didn't expect that. So he wrote me back and we struck up a friendship and to this day, you know, we'll go on the road as Jew and Gentile together as a sign of unity and solidarity with the one God, worshiping the one true God together, identifying as a Christian and identifying as a Messianic Jew, same beliefs, different blood, and he's a dear friend. That was a long, convoluted answer. Forgive me.
No, that was great. That was a great answer. So you obviously have, this is not just an abstract thing for you, and neither is it for me, where you learn things and then you go, you know what, maybe this should change how I live a little bit. You know, maybe this should change, you know, maybe I should sort of do the Sabbath. Maybe I should do a kind of a Shabbat thing from Friday night to Saturday night. And that, what's interesting to me, and I know it has to be the same with you, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. For me, that has never been a burden or like, oh man, now I gotta, you know, whatever. It's been like, I felt invited into another family that I didn't know I had. And that's been exciting.
Yes. There's so many pictures and illustrations and analogies are so important for the human mind, which is why I believe Jesus spoke in parables as often as he did. And so I'm constantly on a fine-tuning search of the best way to explain the emotion of anything for, in general, but specifically this. There's this sense of, there's a sense of adoption, like you said, with a family, where it makes me think of C.S. Lewis's book in the Narnia Chronicles of The Horse and His Boy, where Shasta is this boy and he's doing his thing. He goes on these adventures and he meets someone who kind of looks like him a lot. And like, boy, are we twins? We could be doppelgangers. Well, it turns out that it is a twin. And the shock, spoiler alert, at the end of the little mini book, little story, is that he's been a child of the king all along, that he was lost and he was displaced. And so all of a sudden, the truth didn't change. He just learned something.
Right.
It's like, wow, I'm in this family. I've always been in this. So it's like, in a sense, it wasn't adoption. It was a lack of identity.
Yeah.
It was I was confused about who I am. And I lived according to who I thought I was. And so when I realized that I'm a child of the king, it changes things. Now, we can hear that, and as Christians also put that through this very similar filter, and the theology is not too different, but with the analogy of the Jewish roots, the Jewish beginning. Again, we're in agreement with Paul. No one's trying to be Judaizers, but there's a history, we're also big on ancestry.com and finding out our roots. And there's television shows about I think it's actually called Finding Your Roots, maybe, where they bring someone in and someone else does all the research, and then they lay it out in front of them and say, you want to know who you really are? You know your story. You might even know your parents' story, but do you know your great-grandfather's story? And you watch the tears come to their eyes when they realize who they are. And this journey for you and me is a discovery of who we are. Of what
exactly. It's almost like when we read the Bible now, it's not someone else's story. It's not a book about those people over there.
Right.
We are a part of those people. We've been grafted into those people. And that realization, I wrote a song a couple of years ago about going to Israel, about my first experience in Israel. And the hook line of the chorus is, I was homesick for a place I'd never been. It was like, I didn't know how much I longed to be at this place. You probably had that same feeling when you're in Israel. You're just like, man, I'm kind of home, it's
totally.
So you and I have been involved in a different way. And that is, most of the people in my Christian world that I deal with, you and I both now are kind of in a couple different worlds. We have the kind of Christian community that we grew up as a part of and are still very much a part of. I'm still a Christian pastor. And so we have that group of people, but then we have this messianic group of people that we're also a part of. And we're almost kind of, Phil Keaggy had a song years ago called Two Worlds, when you walk in two worlds. And it's almost like we are in those two worlds. It's like we have one foot here and one foot there, and they're not competing with one another and they're not against one another. It's just kind of two different worlds. So most of my Christian friends, family, whatever, they don't really know much, or I don't want to say they don't care. That's not what I mean. They don't feel like it applies to them that I do this Messianic Jewish stuff.
It's a fun little hobby for you. Good luck.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. So you're a pastor. You only work one day a week. Now you want to work two? What's going on? You want Saturday and Sunday? So anyway, there's this whole crop of people in my life that don't know about this ministry that I have. So I have a ministry called Kosher Pastor that seeks to try to connect Christians with their Jewish roots, and not in a Judaizing way, and not in a bash you over your head way, and not in a shaming way or anything like that. And a while back, several months ago, you became a student in that program. And I would love to hear from you from the outside, as an outsider, as someone, you and I did not know each other. We came to meet each other because of this Kosher Pastor thing. Because of your meeting Rabbi Shapira, because of his contact with Joshua Aaron. And so it was like,
right. It all comes together. Yeah.
The circles are, they're coming together. The Voltron is being built, as it were. So I would love to hear your opinion, and I have not previously asked you about this. This is your real unscripted whatever, but I'd love to hear your opinion as someone who comes from a place like me, Christian background, Christian family, Christian heritage. How has this particular program, do you think that it's applicable to the larger Christian world, or is it a little, I guess what I'm saying is it too niche, or do you think any Christian would benefit from this kind of thing?
Absolutely, they would benefit. And it's because it's information, and it's because it's truth. Now, on the Enneagram scale, I'm a 5, which means I binge on information. So that being said, if I feel like truth informs everything, and I have sympathy is the right word, but for people who are seeking, I feel like everyone seeks truth. I've often said that to my kids. No one's going to go out of their way to try to find falsehood. Like they might arrive at a different conclusion, but there's still only one truth. And so I feel like every time I sit in a session, and I was keeping notes in a notebook, and then I switched to making notes online, keeping them digitally in a nice file because I organize better that way. But it's a lovely fire hose of information. Some things that I'm like, oh man, I had no clue, and you have to go back and rewind it and listen to it again and make sure you get the note right. And I love that I really do love that it's in the format of a simple quiz after almost every session, because I can listen to things like while I'm I just listen to a podcast while I'm cutting the grass, and I'm like 80%, maybe 90% paying attention, and 10% of making sure my lines are straight, but right. This is like 100% pay attention, because the most, the smallest little detail might be one of the questions in the quiz, and I want to get 100%, and it's so there's the fun of that. Now, maybe if you're in high school, you might not think the tests are fun, but as an adult, I'm like, this is great, this is fun. It's the information is it's this beautiful, it's kind of like, emotionally, it's kind of like I don't want to say a revisionist history, but like when you're watching a movie about something historical that you're familiar with, but when deeper light is shed on it, all of a sudden it becomes more real. And so the majority of what you might be talking about in the Bible, I am pretty familiar with, but I might not know the story behind it. And that to me is a revelation that is better than any fiction novel I can read. When I'm like, oh my word, okay, so that's what was said. And through my 21st century Western Christian lens, this is what I innocently assumed it meant. But now you're telling me that in this, like, with factual, documented historical references, that's not what it means at all. It actually means this. And most of the time, if not all of the time, when the light is shed on it in that way, I walk away going, that changes everything. That changes everything.
Yeah.
Wow. It doesn't change my theology in as much as deepens my love and my respect for the sovereign beauty and love of God himself for his people and the brilliance of his plan. The more you know, right? The more you know. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And absolutely, to go back to your question, absolutely applicable to any believer.
I think so, but I wanted to get someone else's opinion on that. Now, what if someone doesn't know anything about this Jewish roots of our faith, Messianic stuff, Hebrew, anything? If they know nothing and they go into the Kosher Pastor program, do you think it starts basic enough to where anybody can jump in?
Oh yeah, the beauty of the kiddie pool zero entrance is that you get your foot wet little by little, and it's a good way to get into the pool. Even if you're an adult, you want to cannonball into the deep end, and I feel like it's a beautiful start at 101 level, and yeah, there's I'm not so arrogant to think that I could sit through those first 4 or 5 things going like, I know all this. Like we need reminded on the most simple of things, don't we? Because we're humans.
Absolutely.
My brother a couple of minutes ago was trying to tell me how to divide 100 into 4. I was trying, like, is it 25%, 0.25? He's like, no, dude, it's just 25%. I'm like, I know this. I'm an adult. But we need reminded of the most simple things, you know? So for someone who has, I think even to take it a step further and say, well, I don't know. I might have to revisit this thought. If someone were brand new to Christianity, I'd say learn it right the first time. And what
that's a great way to put that,
man. Right. And let me clarify that comment by saying, like, the people, the Christian leaders who raised me in my own home, in my childhood church, in the Bible college that I went to, I have the utmost respect for all of them. And I hope that my kids have the utmost respect for me, because I am teaching them everything I know. I'm not teaching them what I don't know yet. And I made the joking comment the other day to some friends about, I am dogmatic about everything I believe, but tomorrow I might change my mind.
Right, sure.
Because I'm learning. I'm always learning. And there are things that I'm like, oh man, this is the way it is. This is the way it is. And it's great to have convictions. But you might learn something tomorrow that challenges your conviction. So right. I'm always open to learn.
Well, maybe the opposite question, Aaron, is the program deep enough to where if they already know some Messianic stuff, can they still get something out of it?
You get to tread water soon enough. That's for sure. It gets beautifully deep. And multiple times, hey, you can look at my grades and see that I didn't get 100% every time. You know, there's things to learn. And I'm not the guy that's like, oh, well, 90%, that's a passing grade. I'm like, what did I miss? Like, I need to learn this. Maybe that's the 5 in me on the Enneagram scale. Like, I need to learn this information. I want to learn this information.
If I'm not mistaken, and my memory's bad, I apologize. It's the ADHD. But I think you've even texted me before and like, hey, man, I missed this one. You know what?
What happened to my 100% average? Shoot.
Let me say, as the leader of this program, it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you.
I want you to know it's all right.
It's about learning. This is what I tell my kids. They're in junior high. It's like, listen, it's not when you get a less than perfect grade, it's indicating what you haven't learned yet. And this is about learning, you know. And I feel that it's absolutely deep enough. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've watched a session, whether it's in this room or in the back porch. Those are my 2 favorite places to watch. And I'm just like, and things are said. I'm like, what? Oh my! It's those paradigm shifts. It's like, well, if before I knew this, so it's just beautiful. It's when you say is it deep enough? It's the beauty of those little tiny pieces of information that inform the big, you know. And so even if you have the big picture, I'm talking to like. Maybe a Christian pastor, or even just someone who has a thirst for knowledge and studying the Bible. And you have the big picture. The pieces of information, because you've dug so deep, because you guys at Kosher Pastor have dug so deep and you're finding these gems, it does change the overall topography of our big picture in a beautiful, beautiful way.
Can I put you on the spot and ask you, is there something that you can pull out specifically that you've learned in the Kosher Pastor program where you go, oh man, I never thought about that way? Or, oh man, I didn't know that meant that.
Man, so let me think so much. I just, the most recent ones that I've been on, is the ones that are coming to the top of my head. And that's just about and the archaeological stuff that you discovered up in the Golan up there, and oh my word, in the I don't say morphing, but the early centuries of Christians, and the way you discover some of this is by the studying of the tombs, and the markers that were obviously Jewish, markers that were obviously Christian, and then you find the blending of the two.
Yeah.
And not beyond just potentially confusing, realizing, wait a minute, these are Christians. These are people who were choosing to follow Jesus, but they had not rejected their Jewish culture, their Jewish traditions, which feels very different from where we are in 2020.
Right.
I think why one of the reasons why I like it so much, when I was a kid, I wanted to either be a weatherman or an archaeologist. So a meteorologist those were my two dream jobs. You know, policeman, fireman, those were for my friends, football player. I wanted to be an archaeologist. So seeing that stuff in the Holy Land with biblical references and the traditions, it just comes alive to me. And I'm trying to zoom in on the screen because I want to see things closer. And
Right.
The idea of the bone pit.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't have time to go into all the details of that, but it sheds light and it changes things. Just in general, there to realize that it wasn't this shedding of Jewish ways. Well, we're Christians now, or we're followers of Jesus, so we don't have to do all this stupid stuff. That wasn't it at all. Right. It was like, no, it's not stupid. This is what we do. It's precious to us, and we're going to keep these ways. So many of them were directly from God Himself. That leads me to one. The idea, or no, because that sounds like it's a theory. The concept, the truth that the word Torah, we've translated as law. Okay. But that misleads our modern mind to believe that it's like, hey, do this, and if you break it, you're going to prison. You know, it's like the Torah is better. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but Torah is better translated as teaching, or the way that you should go, the way you should walk, and that to me sounds like what I say to my boys. Like, hey, let me teach you some things. I just went on 2 nature walks with both my boys. 13 and 11, so this is a little premature, but like, hey, you're going to be thinking about dating. We've already had the talk, but like you're going to be thinking about dating pretty soon. Let's talk about like the way that you should treat a girl and respect a girl. And when you find that girl that your heart like skips a beat a little bit for, you're going to want to act weird, and you're going to want to be funnier than you really are. You're going to want to say things that you think impress her. But let me teach you the way that you should go. Now, I didn't give them a law. Right? I'm teaching them because I'm a father who loves them. And I'm like, yes, keep yourself out of trouble. So now this is where the analogy breaks down. As a human, I'm saying, keep yourself from making the mistakes that I did 20 some years ago. And let me teach you. So that's God didn't make mistakes that He needs to fix for His kids, but He knows the good way. He is the good way. He is love, and the definition of it. And He's like, let me tell you the good way to go. Don't kill people. It's going to go bad for you. Yeah. You know, he who kills by the sword. Don't steal. Don't covet. Don't take my name in vain. Like this is the way that you should go, and that changes the whole perspective of Torah and law. Huge. Wow. And we jump into that. Those are the first 2 lessons in the whole program is Torah versus law, parts 1 and 2. Yes. We dive right in there. Wow. And so that might, and it's presented in a way that's understandable, if palatable is the right word, like bite-sized, like I get it. But yet, any truth that you're not currently embracing is paradigm shifting. Any truth, sure. Even if it's simple and bite-sized, it's still paradigm shifting. Wow. So would you say that Aaron Shust, the guy who was constantly in church because his mom was coming up with the music, you grew up in a Christian home, you're in a good church, you went to Bible college, you're a worship leader. Does that guy, all of that encapsulates this has your kind of stamp of approval? This, as a worship leader, as a Bible school graduate, this is okay. I think this is okay. Where were you 40 years ago? Yes. Wow. Yes. That's the same way I feel about Rabbi Shapira and Joshua Arad and all these people, It's the grace of God. I've gone back over my lyrics and my songs that I have released to the world over the last, I don't know how many, 15 years. And by the grace of God, I haven't said anything that I regret, theologically speaking.
That's awesome.
Right? There have been a couple devotional thoughts that I've included in the liner notes that I might have said differently. And that goes back to, hey, I believe what I believe until I learn something differently.
Exactly. Sure.
So
Wow.
that being said, I kind of tongue in cheek about I'm dogmatic about something, but I might change my mind tomorrow. I think the lesson to be learned is be really careful what you're dogmatic about.
Sure.
Right.
Wow.
I love the story of Billy Graham, who whenever he was a young preacher was challenged by some of his religious friends to consider the fact that the Bible was not authoritative, that it was fallible. And he was wrestling in his soul. This is what I do. Do I believe this or not? And he was in California, Southern California. I'm forgetting the name of the town. It's not coming to me. But he went out into the woods, moonlit night. Perfect story. It's wonderful. He found a stump, like a tree stump, put the Bible down on that tree stump, knelt, I believe, and declared, I am going to believe the words in this book. By faith, I believe.
Wow.
And that's a dogma worth holding on to. We have to interpret those words. Again, we have to interpret those words through an accurate lens. And if you put it through the 21st century Western Christian lens, I would go so far as to say it might be misleading. It doesn't mean that the word of God is inerrant. I believe it is. Right. Did I say it wrong? I said it wrong. It doesn't mean that the double negative. It doesn't mean that the word of God is errant. I believe that the word of God is inerrant, without error. But how we interpret it is important. It's very important.
Right. Well, Aaron, this has been a joy. Thank you for opening up about some very personal stuff. I mean, what you and your family are on a journey with, and I appreciate that. And hopefully,
and we're on that journey together. Just for the record, it's not me alone being the crazy guy in the house.
Right.
We are all in. My wife, my children. I wish you could hear my little 8-year-old boy with Down syndrome try to say Shabbat Shalom. It's adorable.
That's awesome.
It's like Shema, 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 Shalom. That's how it comes out.
You're like, perfect. Love it.
Perfect.
Well, Aaron, thank you once again. And listen, if you guys are watching this, if you come from a Christian background, and if you are interested in learning about depths of your faith that you didn't know were there, then maybe Kosher Pastor is for you. So thank you so very much. God bless you. And both Aaron and I will say to you, Shalom.
Shalom.